record on this computer, Facebook Live, and choose where you want to post live. Yes, go to Facebook Live. Yes, next. Almost ready.
Hey, Mark, you're muted.
You probably should be for a minute.
Oh.
All right. Who's in focus? So let's get. Here, I got to get rid of one of these. No, I don't want to do that. Cancel. All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So we are doing Facebook Live. This is Civil Rights Enforcement Agency podcast, Civil Rights and You, the show that focuses on federal, state, and local civil human rights and their impact on your life. My name is Charles Bryson, Director of the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency under the auspices of Mayor Lyda Crewson. And this show and anything contained in it, including any comments I may make, are my own and not reflective or respective of anybody else. So that being said, good morning, and let's go around and introduce ourselves and a little bit about your background in the real estate industry.
Who's first? I guess that's me then. So I'm James Deering. I own Resource LLC, the licensed real estate agency, and partners with Resource PM and MVP with Mark Westlock, who you'll hear from shortly. I am a realtor and as such adhere to certain standards. I've had my license for now little over 25 years. I'm active in the association locally and state associations as a director, commercial board member, and Lifetime Achievement Award. I'm old, I've been around for a long time, and I own about 50 units, so the mix of small commercial retail storefronts and apartments and houses as well, which Mr. Westlock capably manages for us with a number of other clients.
Mark, I guess that's your lead in.
Okay. I am Mark Westlock, and I'm the property manager at Merrimack Valley Properties Management. I'm a licensed real estate agent in the state of Missouri as well. James is my broker partner. I've been at this for about 10 years. I own probably about 40 doors of my own. We manage probably about 250 doors altogether for over 40 some clients. I focus primarily on property management. I don't really engage much with real estate transactions in terms of buying and selling. I let James handle that. My focus more is on tenant management, everything from the screening process through the tenant management process. And also we do have a maintenance company that oversees the maintenance for our properties and does contracting work as well.
Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Nash. My husband and I run a small real estate investment firm, the property management arm of which is Nash Properties. John is a licensed real estate broker and agent, mainly working for us to buy and sell properties. And we have a vertically integrated company. So we do real estate investment and we buy properties, we identify them. Typically, it's a moderate rehab, and then we either sell or lease it out. And that's where the property management comes in. And that is the main focus of what I do for the company. I run operations for all branches of the company, but I am eyeball deep in dealing with the operations of the property, the tenant, much like what Mark was describing, from the minute an apartment is ready to rent till the minute we get somebody moved in and thereafter.
Thank you all. So, and Amy, please, you don't need to mute. So we don't go
Oh,
through that. So the moment that COVID hit, and I guess the first month or so, what was your reactions, both in terms of did you think that this was going to end quickly? Did all of a sudden you go, what's getting ready to happen? And as your tenants began to lose jobs, did they come to you? Did you go to them? How did some of those situations play out? And I'm talking early COVID, not the longevity of it. So the first 2 or 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we'll let ladies go first.
We were in shock a little bit. It happened very quickly, even though we were watching what was happening, the news coming out of Italy and, those early months, January, February, before we went full lockdown here in Missouri. So it was a little bit of shock. It brought us back to 2009. We'd lived through 2009. And so we thought about how we managed through that. And we thought about, well, how are we going to manage through this? We did not see a great disruption in rents early on. People were still employed. People were, there was money pushed out to people. So we didn't see a lot of problems. We saw a little bit of people coming to us saying, I'm going to pay my rent a little bit late. And so we would accept all of that. And then we thought, well, how will we manage through moving people in, moving people out, showing apartments? And then we just thought about our operations and what we needed to do to be able to kick out maintenance and keep the properties stable and keep the tenants stable, because those things are one and the same. If the tenants aren't stable, then the properties aren't stable and nobody wins. So that was our main focus. We shot out a lot of information to our residents, giving the CDC guidelines and the county guidelines and the city guidelines. There was a lot of information that was changing quickly. So trying to maintain some calm and send out information to tenants. But in those early months, there was not a lot of we were kind of waiting for it to happen, and it wasn't.
And kind of a day-to-day sort of, I got this CDC guideline today. I got this city or county health department guideline tomorrow. And so you were virtually reacting day to day.
Absolutely, yes. And we had some company-wide policies that we put in place that didn't matter if our property was in the county or the property was in the city, and what they were doing with mask mandates and social distancing and locking down. We just said across the board, this is how we're going to handle it to try to keep our maintenance safe and try to keep our tenants safe. So we insisted on masks and only hitting emergency maintenance, so that we could react day to day to your question, but also have this kind of blanket standard so that people knew what they were supposed to do when they showed up to work.
Mark?
Certainly some similar actions on our end. Our first concern was safety. We didn't want to see people get sick. We didn't want to see people get exposed to the virus. It was a period of huge unknown. And we had to address things from a couple of different perspectives, not just the rent collections, but what about people that were being subjected to notices for increase in rent? What about people that have maintenance issues? So I'll start on the maintenance end. What we did is for our maintenance team, we went out and got as much personal protective equipment as we could. And unfortunately, that became a surcharge to our clients, but we wanted to do everything we could to prevent our tenants from going in and getting exposed to somebody that might have the virus. Any maintenance issue that was truly like not an emergency or something that could be put on hold for a few months was automatically deferred backwards. But certainly something like a toilet not working or a sink that's clogged up, a refrigerator not working, we had to manage those situations. So so that was an expense that was unfortunate, but we had to manage that very sparingly and very carefully. With regards,
let me ask, did you ask your tenants to leave an apartment so that maintenance could come in? How were those things handled?
Well, we wouldn't necessarily ask them to leave because, I mean, what we understood at that time is if they had been exposed to the virus, that it would be on surfaces. And so even if they left, it would still be around. So our team just went in with full bodysuits, gloves, face masks, goggles, and did what they had to do, leave, strip down outside and take all that equipment off. What we would encourage is that
not strip down, but just remove the protective gear.
Yes, the protective equipment. Yeah.
Okay.
So to remove that, if the tenant was present, we would likely ask them if they wouldn't mind maybe staying in another room so that there would be some social distancing. When it came to the tenant rents, initially, I don't recall there being too many issues, but then as the job started getting to be cut, and I think that the biggest conundrum that we saw was single mothers that were working, but their daycares were closed. They got caught in a really bad bind because they had nowhere to take their kids for daycare. So therefore they couldn't go to work, and they couldn't go to work. Well, then they couldn't get money to pay their rent. And that became a very difficult situation to manage. We started going to the assistance agencies as fast as possible, and we directed tenants to those agencies, and they stepped up until their funds ran out. So everyone from St. Patrick's to Catholic Charities to Habitat for Humanity, they're just, anybody out there that had funds, we were directing people to, and there was some success for that. But there were some situations where we had to obtain judgments against tenants. We certainly were not trying to put anybody out unless they were a behavioral problem. And we had one or two of those where we actually we had to go back and get an unlawful detainer and have them removed out of the property. But that was certainly not the norm. But all in all, as soon as the assistance programs kicked in, a lot of money started to flow in, and it was a surprise. I mean, some of our rent collections have been better than they were pre-COVID. So, so the owners, we certainly held off on rent increases. We were very flexible with, discounting or waiving late fees. And, we tried to be as compassionate as we could, but at the same time, banks were wanting their mortgage payments. Utilities were wanting paid. Maintenance guys doing work needed to get paid so they could afford their rent or their house payments. So we had to try to keep the engine moving, and it kept moving. We just had to be very cautious about the steps that we took.
James, what did you hear at that time from your, I know you've been active in a variety of different landlord and property owner and real estate organizations. What were you hearing? What was the scuttlebutt on the street about what was going on?
I think initially there was some concern and some confusion and trying to sort out what was true and what might happen. I want to backtrack for just a minute. In full disclosure, say that I am also a CREA board commissioner, and also that my opinions are my own. And as you all know, I am quite opinionated on some issues that also do not maybe correlate with the norm. So my initial and still reaction, if you will, to this, what I call panicdemic, is that there was a great overreaction. I'm someone that takes a laissez-faire type approach and a libertarian type philosophy, and I didn't like the government overreach with evictions moratoriums and restrictions on movement and telling people what they couldn't do. And I found it kind of an interesting contrast, having worked with directly still and interact with my tenants, although a lot of it's handled through property management company now, that they had different solutions. And a lot of them, as Mark mentioned, a lot of them were fine. They still worked or were able to do what they did. The ones on subsidy still were getting paid, and the good tenants were still paying and communicating with us. On the other hand, we had people that definitely took advantage of the situation, and I'll save one story for when we get into that. But that's sort of how I felt in my reaction. And I can't say for a lot of my colleagues, not everyone that's a realtor also owns or manages properties, but I think my sentiment holds true for people like the Nashes, maybe. And I'll let Amy respond to that.
Was there, James, I want to stay with you. Was there conversation, was there email exchanges about that offered some sort of direction? So maybe a landlord association, a real estate association. Was there somebody sort of far thinking, and I'm not you saying it was a positive or negative, but was somebody far thinking to say, here are changes that you may need to make in your operation to keep you, your staff, and the residents safe?
I think we got that direction from our local realtor associations, but it was more regarding, and as I'm involved with in brokerage and agency, in agents keeping safe and cautions, and what to do about open houses and how to deal with things virtually. In regards to the property managers and those entities, I'm not as involved, but I didn't see a lot of direction in terms of here's what you need to do, or here's what you can't do. I'm a lot more involved in advocacy. So championing those rights of property owners with that, siding with landlords and trying to get things that were fair, if you will.
So we have the first moratorium, and then we have the second moratorium. How does that begin to change? And this is to anyone. How did that begin to change where you thought you were versus where you thought you were going? And did you really think that this was going to last literally a year?
I can start on that one. I definitely, I can remember telling my kids, we're in this for 18 months. And I was thinking more along the lines of school and social distancing and whatnot. I didn't connect that with eviction moratoriums being in place as long as they are. I understand and agree with the necessity of them, keeping, homelessness and keeping people, separate, to control the pandemic. I understand. I understand why we are where we are. I don't know what's going to happen when the, proverbial floodgates open. And
we'll get to that in a minute. So don't hold that thought.
No, but I can tell you from where we were or where we thought we were, we weren't much different. So, and what I mean by that is we are owner operators. We don't do any third party management. So that lets us, I think, kind of control the rules of how we run our company a little bit better. And we've never, we avoid eviction at all cost.
Yeah.
So that didn't change for us. But for those tenants that you might have had to push towards eviction in our old world, it forces us to be a little bit more creative about how we can help them and help us and kind of work out the situation that needs to be worked out. So it didn't change for us a whole lot, but it did, encourage us to be more creative in working with people.
Mark?
Yeah, I would agree. You know, I felt for political reasons that this was going to drag on through the election. Not to try to get into politics too much, but I could see how this whole issue, follow the science, and then, well, we changed the goalpost and stuff like that, that a lot of this was being used for political reasons. So just on that basis alone, I figured that this was going to extend into the election. I was a little surprised that they decided that they wanted to do a second lockdown, particularly in the county, but then the city really didn't follow suit with the county as strictly. And guess what? We're all here. So I actually applaud Mayor Cruzen for not following the direction of the county as far as shutting everything down, because in the county, well, it's unfortunate. I mean, some of the people that work in the county in the restaurants, guess where they live? Well, they live in the city, and they're some of our tenants, and they, became unemployed, and they were the ones we had to help them find assistance, because maybe their restaurant wasn't going to get another PPP loan, or was just saying you're furloughed and we'll call you back when we come back. I do wish the city restaurants would have been a little more aggressive in staying open. I think that could have helped tenants that work in that particular industry, and some of them did stay open, and which was good. But as we move through this, we're at a point now where the state of Missouri is kicking in, and they're helping with EARP funds, which is helping people that were really hammered last year, getting a lot of their back rent caught up, their current rent, and even in some cases helping them out with a month of rent going forward. So like Amy, we don't like to evict. Eviction is I look at it as a lose situation. The owner loses, the property manager loses, and the tenant loses. And our objective has always been try to get the tenant to stay, but we have to get the money. And if we can, be creative with other third-party resources to bring those funds in to help the people that really are in need, that's what we do. And I feel we've actually been extremely successful at that. And some of our clients have really been helped out by programs from the state and from the federal government, and funds being managed through the United Way and St. Patrick's. They've helped a lot of people. I suspect that that's going to continue, because there are still people out there that are not back to work. And I think some of it is by self-design or self-selection. And again, though, we are still running into that problem. Well, I want to go to work, but my kids don't have a daycare open, or the public schools aren't completely open. And so how do I go to work and who's going to watch my kids? And so that issue is still an issue, and that needs to be hopefully worked out quickly.
Where the tenants are saying, why would I want to go back to work when I'm getting unemployment and I'm getting rent subsidies, and that it doesn't pay me to go back to work? In terms of the terms and the longevity, I knew it would be a while before a vaccine was developed, and it really was fast tracked. I was just surprised that people's reaction, or what I call an overreaction to it, shut down the economy and commerce as long as it has. And I've traveled during this time period, both flown and drove and seen and been in other cities and states, and the reactions are all kind of different. Restrictions are different, but I found that the ones that seemed to be looser also were not as subjected to, a disease or written in, there weren't all these hospitalizations and deaths as a result of it. And so that's concerning. The The other concern I have is this has changed the way that we do business. We're here virtually talking on Zoom, and you know, there's going to be another strain of virus or flu that comes around right after this. So what are we going to do? Just repeat this same process again? Or when some variant of the COVID comes through and people think that they have to have a vaccine before they can live their lives? I think we're going to be in this for the long run.
Sounds like it. So I'm gonna go back to both Amy and Mark for a second. The way you all talk tells me you have had to keep up with federal, state, and local laws, rules, and regulations around COVID more than you have possibly anything else other than maybe housing policy. Did you really have to, was it all of a sudden, I got to keep track of all this stuff going on because this is affecting my tenants and it's affecting my livelihood?
Absolutely. I probably spent March and April on my computer trying to find out as much as I possibly can, looking at all kinds of different landlord groups. What are people doing? What are people talking about? What are their best practices? What are their ideas? Talking with our bankers, you know, what happens if our properties do stop performing? What, you know, what relief do we have on that end if we come to that? And then just, you know, like you were saying, there's different levels of legislation that we have to keep up with. And that was a little bit exhausting too. Not only were things changing so quickly in the beginning, the way Missouri was not, everything was different at a state level, at a county level, at a city level. You really kind of had to keep on top of it. And it was sort of exhausting at the beginning because you want to know the information and you want to make the right decisions, but then the information would change and you'd have to regroup. So it was kind of intense. It was very intense at the beginning.
Well, you keep using the word was, and I'm going to say is, because we're still going through it. So we still have some exhaustion.
Yeah, it is in a different way for sure. I feel like some of that, the newness of it, the urgency of it has worn us down, but that's died down a little bit. We have a little bit more understanding and we are where we are. So we just have to kind of deal with what we're dealing with. So yes, it's still very intense, but just in a different, and I feel it's a bit calmer for us.
Mark?
Yes, you know, I would say, I would agree with her, you know, with Amy, that there definitely were a lot of changes coming. Very fortunate, we used the law offices of Catherine Davis, and they were excellent at keeping us updated with, here's what's going on in the county, here's what's going on in the city, here's what's going on federally. And as things would change and laws would change, they were very good to update us. And that really simplified our management in what we had to do extreme. I mean, we didn't have to go out and try to figure out, well, what can I do? What can I not do? We were being told by our attorneys, here's what you have to do. And here's the latest update. And here's what we're trying to do. So, so in that respect, it took a lot of stress off of us. You know, where we are right now, you know, I believe the eviction moratorium in the city is being lifted, I think April 1st. But it's like I told my attorney, I don't really have anybody right now to toss out because the state has stepped in and they're providing funds for a lot of people that need help. But I also agree with James here in that, unfortunately, we have people that are able-bodied, willing people. I did one of my tenants who's a middle-aged, very healthy, educated male that is behind on his rent because, quote, he can't find a job. Well, no, you're just not looking because there are places out there looking for people. He's just not wanting to work. So, you know, people like them will be people that we will probably end our business relationship with in the near future.
James, I saw you sort of nodding your head. Do you have a comment in here?
Yeah, there's a lot of stress that's created on people, and I think the focus has been on the tenants and the renters and that, and I think it's now just getting back around to, hey, landlords and the property owners are caught in the middle of this, expected to perform, but without the resources to do it. We're added the additional stress, as Mark alluded to and as Amy researched, of all this compliance stuff that we have to do to stay within the ever-shifting regulations and rules and legislations and new mandates. To complicate that, Mark and I be going through and still waiting to be finalized. We're going through an audit during this time. And so that certainly adds to the stress. And then, I'll just tell a couple of brief short stories with regards to tenant reaction that Mark opened up. I've got one tenant who just stopped paying rent because he thought he could. And then he said, well, I'll start paying again if you fix the place up. And this guy is a smoker. He's lived in the place a long time and he wanted it all painted and that. And I said, I wasn't going to do that. Pay your rent. Amy, you probably deal with it. Pay your rent. We'll fix it. We'll fix it. You pay your rent. It shouldn't even get to that negotiating point. But the guy called the city inspector and he came in and cited the place. And I said, well, go ahead and condemn it. But I can't kick the guy out. And so I just paid the first fine for not being in compliance for occupancy because we're wrestling with this. But the result is, which I finally caved in to do, and this is a tenant I've had for like 6 years of paying sub-market rate rent anyway, is I've offered him a new lease at a slightly higher rate, still sub-market, so that we can apply to get funds to have him catch up. But in the meantime, he's still been making money. He works side jobs and he gets a check. That's what people say. I get a check. And he's just, I'm sure he's banking it in escrow to pay what he owes. Right. So that's one instance. In another building, a multifamily, we had a lady who came in as subsidy. COVID hit. And she was subsidized in terms of deposit and first month's rent, but she was on her own to pay. And she just intentionally stopped paying. And we had problems, legal problems, unauthorized guests and people, animals there. And it was creating a big disturbance in this multifamily of mine for that. And I finally said something to her coming and going. Actually, she was leaving the place with a bunch of people still in her apartment to go to work. And I said, hey, what about the rent? And she looked at me and just said, haven't you ever heard of COVID? Like, she didn't have to pay. She ended up leaving and just left the people there who barricaded themselves into the unit. And I couldn't evict them with that. Mark and I wrestled with this one, and finally we just threw them out. That's the dilemma. And I'm sure there are other horror stories of that. On the other hand, there are some good stories where the tenants did communicate with us and reached out and said, hey, I'm trying. Here's a partial payment. Here's what I'm trying to do. Can you help me? Can it work? And I know on all my properties, I'm pretty soft and I work with people. Mark's a lot stricter in terms of collection, but hey, if you're communicating with me and you're trying and you're making an attempt, I'll work with you. But as soon as you don't communicate and you don't make any payments at all, then we've got to go the rent and possession judgment route.
Did
Yep.
you all get any of those federal agreements? Did any of your tenants fill out that whatever that I think the CDC said, fill this out and make sure you give it to your landlord and set up some sort of payment plan, but make sure you communicate with them. Did you all receive any of those?
No.
I never even heard of that.
We'll talk later, James.
I think we didn't receive any of those at all. And to something that, James and Mark both touched on is that, their tenants didn't know, for example, that they didn't have to pay rent anymore. They thought they didn't have to. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of no information out there. I'm not sure that my tenants necessarily know where to go for information. For example, I've had two that I've sort of had to kind of limp along and work on with them, and I'm sending them these correspondence that is like, if you're out of work, if this is COVID related, if you can't afford the apartment, reach out to us. Let's work together. Here's links for the city, then I knew about the CDC guidelines on how they would qualify. But I was having a hard time getting people to even respond to my requests for, hey, let's work this out. Let's not let you get any further behind. What can you pay and when? We'll work with it. But I just
did you do that by phone call? Did you do that by letter?
Email.
How did you try and communicate with them?
We're email. We're mostly virtual. We always have been. So if a tenant wants to talk by phone, we will. But usually it's email.
So you would send somebody an email and they wouldn't respond?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And it was me directly when things get to this point, they escalate from my leasing agent to me, and I would reach out to them directly and say, I'm dead serious. I want to keep you in housing, but we've got to work this out together. And I think Mark talked earlier about waiving late fees, and that's, you don't want people to get further behind than they are, right? You want to keep them stable, keep the rent stable. I didn't get the sense that people really knew what was available to them.
A very interesting phenomena has developed in this. Apparently last year, the average rent increase in St. Louis was 21%. I saw that on the news, and I woke up, I'm like, this is like about a month ago. I'm like, I was in shock. But at the same time, my inventory of available properties has been really low. When we've had a vacancy, I've had multiple people coming, looking, wanting to take it. People are qualified. So that tells me that there are people out there that are doing the right thing, and they're working and they're doing what they need to just do the right thing as tenants. And what I also I think these people that are playing the hardball, I'm not going to pay, I'm going to play with my landlord, I don't think what they realize what they've done, because when the market is this tight for rental properties, if I see somebody and I do a background check and I'm like, well, you owe your last landlord $1,000, $2,000, whatever, or you were a problem, I'm not even going to consider your application. And so these tenants that have tried to play the system and it's not worked out for them, I think they're in for a real rude awakening in the near future here. Just my opinion.
Well, and to pick,
go ahead. No, go ahead, Amy. Go ahead.
I was just going to piggyback off of that a little bit. I think that, absolutely there's people who are playing the system, and there's people who, I'm afraid they don't know. They don't know that, an eviction moratorium doesn't mean you don't owe the rent, and that these credit issues won't follow you, like Mark's saying, not only into your next rental, but other things that are affected by your credit report. And I'm not sure that everybody understands that it's not a free pass. It's a break, it's a relief. And I'm just not sure the information is out there.
So let's talk about where we are right now. We are literally less than 30 days away from the eviction moratorium. Um, I guess one of the things that I have been concerned about as the CREA director is if so this will end up being a question somewhere. If I have been evicted because I didn't have a job and therefore I was behind on rent, and that's the only quote unquote blemish on my record. I now have a job because COVID has, well, because the restrictions have lifted, and I am looking for another rental situation. How much weight are you all putting on an eviction during COVID versus all other things being considered? Because I know many times that's one of the 3 or 4 check the box things on an application is no history of eviction in the last 5 years. But it, to some degree, I would argue is a little hard. And I know what Mark just said, but I think to some degree it's a little hard not to have an eviction for some people at this time frame, especially those in the service industry and the restaurant industry. So yeah, that was actually a question.
Well, I'd like to answer that. Actually, we've got our fair share of people that have gotten behind, and there are programs out there for them to get assistance. They need to reach out with their landlord. The EARP is perhaps the best program I've seen. I mean, they're dropping checks $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 in a day after the application's complete, ending up right in the property manager's account, being posted right to the tenant's account. So there is help out there.
Mark, hold on. So that's the program where the tenant and the landlord work together
Yes.
to fill out the application.
Yes.
And therefore the dollars don't go to the tenant, they do go directly to the landlord. Is that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Come straight to the landlord. And we've seen after the approval is as fast as 1 to 2 days. And it's being deposited into the landlord's bank account. So there are options for people out there. Now, the other challenge that you have to consider, if you, to answer your question, somebody had an eviction, they got kicked out, and then are you going to use that against them when they apply for your property? Well, what if there's a garnishment that kicks up on their new job? Now all of a sudden, well, they have a new job, which is great, and they're paying you rent, but now a garnishment kicks in because they owed rent from their past landlord. They've caught up. Now all of a sudden they can't pay you rent because they're having to pay their back rent. And so those tenants, they need to really explore, they need to really reach out with their landlords and say, what programs can you help me with? Because there are programs, and even I think Eastern Legal Services, and some of the other tenant legal services, they're out there helping people get money. I know that the city actually had appointed counselors when there was an eviction, they would have a counselor sit down with the tenant and get things worked out so they could get them some money that would go to the landlord via the attorney, get them on a payment plan. So there are programs out there for people that want help, but they have to cooperate a little bit. They have to just show some cooperation.
So before we get to Amy, I'm going to push you a little bit. It's not necessarily the eviction. You're also looking at the garnishment and the ability to pay your rent while they still owe possibly thousands of dollars in previous rent. So it's a combination of things.
Yes.
Amy?
Same perspective. I think that it's a really good question, Charles. It's hard to kind of put my brain around. What we do now is, if somebody has had an eviction in their past, that flags as a yellow for us. It's a dig in a little bit deeper to it and see what the circumstances were. And if it's been more than 24 months, a lot of times people have have good rental history, you know, for 2 solid years, and we can overlook these things. So I think we'll take the same sort of approach, and we'll have to dig in. It will cost, you know, a little bit more in time to dig in, to look for garnishments, to look for, well, did you try to work with your landlord? You know, did you submit the CDC forms? You know, kind of what are the circumstances a little bit? Obviously, you have to stay within the guidelines of fair housing, and have an established policy of how you're going to look at these.
You're looking
But just
at, you're, so the way you are talking, you're almost having to do a little bit of social work along with your rental work.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the luxuries of being a smaller property owner. You know, we're always somewhere between 100 and 150 and 220 doors. So we can do a little bit more than giant corporate property managers can.
Yeah.
And so there is definitely a level of humanitarianism that we can try to address with people, whether there are current tenants or we're trying to bring them in. It doesn't always work out that way. But just because somebody was evicted doesn't mean they're a terrible tenant. They could be evicted because they were a terrible tenant and tore the place up or brought in additional,
Right.
whatever.
Right.
But it doesn't always mean that. And I think you have to look at that.
James?
One thing I'd like to add here,
Go ahead.
out on Facebook, for those tenants that are trying to get funds through the EARP program, they have to be in a lease with their current property manager / landlord. We've had some situations where people had a lease from the previous landlord. They got behind, we're trying to get through the EARP program, and they're like, well, they've got to be in your lease. So the tenants really need to cooperate and get that lease changed into the new property manager's lease. And then the state will then become very cooperative in terms of helping them get the funds they need. It's as far back as COVID has started is what I can see.
Does month to month?
No.
So they can't be month to month, even though they were on a previous lease. So the lease ended up at May 1st, and now they're month to month in your property. You're saying that doesn't count?
That's, to my understanding, they have to be in a current lease. Yeah.
12 months or whatever.
With the current manager. So yeah.
Okay. James?
And that's to follow up on what Mark was saying too, that's a wrestle that you have. You've got a problem tenant, maybe non-payment is the excuse of COVID, but in order to recapture past due revenue, you've got to take a chance and extend them in a lease for another year, where normally it'd be like, oh, okay, this person's lease is over, we're not renewing it, and you got to leave. So that's the wrestle we take. And
You can't
based on what
obviously then take that. Well, let me ask you this, the way it's phrased. You can, between you and Mark, you can ask for money up to the point, so the past due amount, but you're saying that you have to be on your lease could not have expired and still seek funding.
right. The goal, I believe, of these assistance providers is to keep the people in their place, not just to compensate the landlord. So what they don't want to do, now that we're finally getting direct payments, rather than the payments go to the tenant, and then they hope the tenant pays the landlord, which in a lot of cases that didn't happen. They're saying, okay, landlords, we're going to give you the money. However, we want you to keep the tenant. Okay, don't just recapture what was owed and then kick our people out. We want, the whole goal of the program is to allow them to catch up and to stay where they are. And like Amy too, before I've had Mark managing my properties. I also did a lot of personal one-on-ones, interviewing people and going through the application. It's like, okay, well, why is this here? Can you provide me an explanation? And everybody always has an explanation. The ones that blame it on a bad landlord who didn't take care of the property and that, those are the ones that you know, I don't like to rent to, because they're blaming non-payment on whatever the landlord did or didn't do. And I thought, well, that's just going to come back on me. But if anything, I've been more compassionate in overlooking some of these prior offenses or problems or that of whatever they may be, if they're in trouble with or had been in trouble with the law, or even evictions or problems, other social problems, mental illnesses, and that. I like to give the people a chance and to look optimistically and take them at their word. Now, that's also caused me a lot of problems. And then in addition to the problems I wrestle with, if and when neighbors, either in my own property or in the neighborhood, find out about it. Oh, that Darren, he's a slumlord. He rents to some terrible people. And that's what you get for being compassionate and giving people a chance. But it's all a working relationship, and it's that communication. And I think Amy hit it right too. I think a lot of the tenants don't really understand what they're able to do, what they can do, what it really means. There's a difference between a forbearance and a forgiveness. And so, the forbearance typically in a banking or a mortgage related thing is working out an agreement and a payment plan to catch up. Nothing is forgiven. There might be some concessions in negotiation with it, but it's certainly not a forgiveness. Okay, all right, you had problems. We'll just write that off and we'll start new today.
That happened. So we only have a couple minutes left because I'm going to go over. Here's my last question, and I want to start, James, I want to go back with you, and then Mark, and then Amy to close out. What lessons have you learned during this time frame, both in terms of how to work with tenants, lease issues, property management issues? What lessons have you taken from this that may change the way you do business, even without COVID in the future?
I think it goes back to what I just said, and which is it's the same thing. It's communication, it's working together, it's being in partnership, because the landlords and the tenants and the property management company all work together for good. And if you have that cooperation and you have the communication, then it works more smoothly. We've had some difficult times with the pandemic, but there's always going to be issues. You alluded to, the housing market downturn and crash. That's coming again. I don't understand why the real estate market has been as good as it is and supply is as low as it is. But that's going to change again too. And there's going to be a dip in prices and surplus inventory and distressed properties. It's a roller coaster, and it's all cyclical. So it's being prepared, being proactive. But the key is communication and a working relationship.
Mark?
Yeah, I agree with everything James said. And, the other part of this is, I think to be successful, as with any business, you have to have a consistent business framework of how you run your business. And in our business, that means complying with fair housing guidelines. Just like James said, it requires good communication, reaching out to people, partnerships, working with your attorneys. Understanding what resources are out there and being flexible. In any business, you have to be flexible with how the market changes. I mean, the game changed for us. They said someone's behind on rent, too bad, they get to stay there. So we, in the past, it would have been like, well, 20 days are out, you're behind a month's rent, you're off to court. Well, that really didn't do any good. So we had to adjust to the new game that we were playing. And that meant that we started reaching more to the assistance programs that were available, really seeing what was going on with the tenant, and, and being patient. They know that they're still going to owe late fees, and, it's not a free ride. At the same time, though, being flexible has helped us out. I said, I've told numerous people, July and February, knock on wood, have been two of the best rent collection months I've ever had in this business. I mean, I've been hitting 120% of rent roll. And you would not expect that in this type of environment, because it's we're stressed. It's an economically challenging environment, but the assistance programs have been so good that they have helped a lot of the back rent owed by people get caught up, which is helping owners exceed their rent roll expectations. And so now they can pay their taxes, they can pay their insurance, they can pay their water bills, their sewer bills, and maybe that maintenance, that those windows that they were going to put in, they couldn't afford to, now they can. So it's been an interesting period. It really has. And now we've got this $1.9 trillion stimulus that's going to hit, and who knows
billion. You said trillion. Billion.
I think it's trillion.
Is it
trillion?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I won't get any time.
Right.
Yeah, it's trillion, and
okay.
And it's to see how this money floods out here, it's going to be a very interesting to see how it affects our environment. Eventually, like James said, this will catch up to us, and then we just have to be aware of that environment and change our game plan to adapt. So,
Amy, take us home.
I have to agree. Adaptability is the biggest lesson for us coming out of COVID. I don't know how this story ends. I don't know what's coming next. I feel like we've been able to be stable. Our residents have been able to be stable because of the money that's been pushed out to them. But what happens next, I don't know. Some business changes that we'll continue to make. We've always been heavily reliant on technology, and we'll continue to develop that more and more. We'll look at how our units are set up, and when we bring new units online, make them COVID safe, if you will. For example, if we can put in a in-unit washer and dryer, we'll do that, because we're hearing from our residents that they would prefer to do that versus go to community spaces. And then we just can't put anything set in stone, because we don't know what is going to happen, and we're going to need to adapt our policies based on what we're seeing with our tenant base. I mean, the basic policies still have to exist, and we still have to run the properties, but we have to be flexible, and we have to be adaptable to what people's needs are. You asked what are some of the lessons of COVID, and COVID really reminded us how much we touch people's lives. These are their homes.
Yep.
And so it's really important that we try to get it right. So that's what we're going to take into 2021. And like Mark was saying earlier, it's kind of a crazy market. The rentals are happening quickly. So
Well, I want to thank you all for being here today. I appreciate hearing your side of this story. Hopefully this will end peacefully and well over the next couple of months, because I know you all want at least a physical break, if not a mental break, in these situations, because they are very trying times. So I want to thank you all. I think we've been on Facebook, and so this is played out there. I'll also send you a copy of the recording in case you want to throw darts at me later. But I appreciate you all being on, and you know, maybe a year from now, 6 months from now, we'll have this same conversation, because I want to see how this ends. I mean, you know, one of the things we didn't talk about were your personal finances and your business finances, but that has to play out as well. You've got to pay your mortgages, you've got to pay your rent, you got to pay your lights, you got to pay your, as Mark said, you got to pay your staff, and people have, I think, forgotten that this is a business. It's not a social service agency. And so at some point, we've got to talk and have that discussion. I didn't think today was appropriate, but certainly maybe in the future as things get caught up, I'll invite you back and we can see how the rest of the story, as July and August unfold, the rest of the story is ending. So thank you all. I greatly appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording and I'm going to end the conversation. So thank you all. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Charles.
Thanks, Charles.
Thank you.